Now, of course, the flip side of being interested in something is that you might not be interested in anything. So one of the other things that's been happening to me this week is this word, ennui. Now, ennui is this French word which literally means to be restless and unsettled. And it means to be uninterested in anything. And the problem for us in this lack of interest is our own self-obsession. We are so consumed by whatever it is that we are interested in for ourselves that we can't see what's all around us. Hence the reason why I actually start with, I was so enthralled by watching this spider literally spin its web right in front of me. I mean, I'm a foot away from this thing, watching this extraordinary beauty take place in God's creation. It was really quite something. But then juxtaposed with that, the opposite of that was all of my reading this week had to do with this concept. For whatever reason, obviously providential, but this is the emphasis of this particular word. Just as a sidebar comment, you'll notice at the bottom of these handouts, there's a text box. And the text box takes into account a number of things that might be on some of these slides that you might not see elsewhere on the handout. And ennui is one of those, and then the word interest is also there, so you don't have to write any words down or take any notes on any of those kinds of things. I was actually even listening in the last couple of days to podcasts where I was just fascinated by the fact that this was the constant concern, that in a culture given to self-obsession, that we are also restless and we have this spirit of ennui about us. And this is the problem for us. Now, look at this picture. Who's the one that's restless of spirit here? Who's the one who's not appreciating the beauty that is all around him in the museum? Do you see him? Do you see him sitting there? Do you see his total lack of interest? And I can just picture this little cartoonish comment going through his mind. I wish I had my video games, that kind of thing. So you have this person who's surrounded by beauty, totally uninterested, totally self-absorbed, totally bored because their own distractions are not there to give them something to place their attention on what they'd rather be doing. So, in the midst of all of this beauty, the midst of the creation all around us, we are still looking for outside distractions, and we miss the spider spinning its web. We miss the absolute attraction of everything around us, whether this be in the visual arts or the musical arts or in some way that we see in the created world itself. I just, coming over here this morning, saw a fox out in the field. These things just are a wonderment to me, and absolutely beyond the state of restlessness. I take great interest in these things. And that's probably one of my problems. You can ask Robin about this. I'm interested in everything, and so I'm distracted by all of these ideas of God's beauty all around me. But I'm not distracted by this. I just came across this week. I can't believe this. This is an institute or a society that literally just began this year. They have a journal called the Journal of Boredom Studies. Now, beyond the fact that, there's the problem of boredom here, I just want you to notice how, as I teach English, among many other things, but I teach English. Notice how many times the word boredom is in the description of boredom. You don't define the word with the word. Please, thank you very much. All right, I got that off my chest now. Everybody's heard that. Here it is. I couldn't believe this society exists. And then I went to their first journal. Oh my. There were so many things I wanted to say about this first journal, and I wanted to bring some of these things forward, but I thought, if I say that, I'll be in trouble. If I say that, I'll be in trouble. So my whole point in emphasizing this is we're not bored in God's creation. I mean, how could we be with all of the beauty all around us? So I also ran across this fascinating bit of study this week. This is from Jack Panksepp, who's a neuroscientist. So that means that somebody who studies the brain and thinks about how those studies actually impact our lives. Check this out. This was from his study. He said the most enjoyable human focus is seeking and working towards satisfaction, the pursuit of an interest. Fascinating that that word pops up again. Working towards satisfaction, toward an interest. This is the ultimate of human desires, is toward these ideas. Now, just pause, stop to consider. Some of you have been in church for a very long time. There might be some thought in your mind about, gee, haven't I seen that somewhere before? Now, just before I go to the next slide, let me just say this. All these folks who are earning PhDs, all these folks doing scientific studies, especially in the realms of psychology and sociology, I want to yell and say, have you read the Bible? Because it's right there, man. It always reminds me of the time when I was watching this PBS documentary, and they were going on and on about how every 7 years, it's a good idea to let your land lay fallow. And the commentator said, over the last 100 years, it has been discovered. And I'm yelling at the television set, it's thousands of years old. Do some research. Sorry, was I too excited about that? I get exercise. This is the kind of thing, these kinds of statements show up in the Bible. See? Look at this. Seek. Did you know? Just go back here. The most enjoyable human focus is seeking. Check this out. Seek first the kingdom. And then the next one from Proverbs, I love those who love me, and those who seek me diligently find me. So, have you been seeking lately? Have you been finding the satisfaction that is necessarily coming from a transcendent point of view? That ultimately is what this neuroscientist is telling us in his research, and it's already in the scriptures. We shouldn't be surprised. And as I think about the book of Proverbs here, and this is Proverbs chapter 8, so beginning in Proverbs 8:12 through the end of the chapter, this is wisdom's personification. That is, wisdom is being presented as a person, as a real being, and wisdom is speaking in this passage. Wisdom is embedded in God's world. I talk about this all the time. Wisdom being embedded in God's world. There are principles of God's handiwork all about us, and we can see it for what it is. Scripture helps us to interpret this. But Proverbs 8 is wisdom telling us this. God, in His wisdom, has given us wisdom. Gee, does this vaguely remind us anything in Second Testament teaching? I hope it does. The book of Colossians calls Jesus wisdom. So could this be the second person of the Trinity incarnate in the First Testament? Oh yeah, sure. We'll talk about that sometime. Seek me diligently. Should we be surprised at this statement that the most enjoyable human focus is seeking? No, because Scripture teaches us that this is something that we should be engaged in. So here's a practical example of this. Let me introduce to you Trevor, or should I say little Trevor, because when Trevor wrote to me the story I'm about to tell you, he talked about himself as Big Trevor and Little Trevor, according to his 3-year-old daughter. So when Trevor took my MA class, one of the books that I had them read in this MA class was The Intellectual Life. Now, The Intellectual Life was written by a French Catholic in the 1920s. And Trevor told me, through this long message that he sent me, he said, I didn't know if I was going to be able to sustain being in this course with you. I didn't think anything good was going to come of reading somebody that was French. I didn't think anything good was going to come from something from the 1920s. But, of course, I chose the book because I do believe this book to be the most practical book on the intellectual life. If you really want to practice the focus of being an intellectual, buy this book, read this book. It is simple, clear, plain stuff. So, when I met Trevor, Trevor did not look like this. Trevor was 40 pounds heavier. This book transformed how he thought about his own diet and exercise. Because he realized that if he was going to pursue the intellect as God had given him this opportunity, he needed to care for his body. It's part of what the book talks about. And that's why his daughter, at 3 years of age, could refer to him as Big Daddy and Little Daddy. When he lost weight, he was Little Daddy. And so this is him 40 pounds lighter after having actually practiced and taken an interest in kingdom wisdom. So we come back to this slide, which I've been showing since week 1, which is the idea that somehow in our culture there is this binary distinction between secular and sacred. So I'm going to tell you what I say every week, and I probably will say this for 12 weeks. There is no such thing as secular anything. There is no secular music, there is no secular movie, and there is no secular chemistry nor physics. Everything is God's, therefore everything is sacred. He is the originator of all things, and He is the sustainer of them, and He will culminate them, bring them together as an end in all things as well. Our view is a cohesive wholeness view, that we see all things from this perspective. I'm going to go back to a slide that I used back in 2017. This is when I was teaching First Testament overview, and this was actually from episode 8 when we talked about the book of Genesis. And I want you to notice this again, and this is my best opportunity to show my artwork, which is absolutely nil. And so no art teacher need ever be concerned that they would lose their job when I'm around. Notice the tree bears fruit, all of these areas of intellectual interest, human life, history, evil, death, and so on. But underneath the tree, all of the roots go back to these basic theological truths, which are transcendence. There is a personal, eternal, triune creator. He is providential. He is the one who is granting his world beneficence. Everything begins in Genesis. So, what we're about to do is give a 30,000-foot flyover of why the creation is the workplace and why we should take an interest in it. So, all of these statements are on your handouts. I'm not going to exercise ourselves here in going through every jot and tittle of each of these statements on each of these pages, but I want to present them to you, especially since you already have the handout in front of you. The responsibility that we have, according to the book of Genesis, where everything comes from, when we think about how we should live life, we are responsible, first of all, to understand that matter is a good thing. Matter is not eternal, but matter is a good thing because God made it. But that doesn't mean that we are materialists, because remember the ISM ending means that that's our philosophy or worldview. So we enjoy the first thing, the matter, the things that are given to us to enjoy. Read the book of 1 Timothy chapter 4 and verse 6, where it says that we are to pray and give thanks to God for all things that He has given to us to enjoy. So the very first thing, and I think this should come as no real shock to us, is that materialism is the bad thing. And my definition of materialism is not what we have, but what has us. So whatever has its tentacles wrapped around us is what materialism may be to us. It may be money, it may be our position, our career, so-called. It may even be our hobbies, or sometimes even our families, or our position in various esteemed community groups. Whatever the case might be, our focus ought to be, once again, transcendent on the God who has made all things for us to enjoy. Now, every once in a while, I run across these very interesting statements from people who absolutely contradict what they said the month before. So here we have the Smithsonian Magazine. Okay, this is just April, May of this year. And notice what they're talking about here. This is a picture of some local folks who are gathering all the underbrush in their local areas, in the wilderness, in all of these treed areas, these marvelous forests all across the United States. They are taking it upon themselves as locals to burn this extra stuff that's on the ground, because anybody who's anybody knows that if you're going to have problems with wildfires, they start At the base, when stuff hasn't been cleaned out, and it's real easy to start fires when you have all of this real flammable material at the bottom of these trees. So these locals have come in. This from the Smithsonian Magazine, who the month before was talking about how climate change was the problem for everything. No, it's not. The issue is one of our responsibility as local people to care for that which has been given to us. So, what does Scripture teach? The original intention is to produce from and protect that which has been given. Both go together. So can you be a good steward of the creation and a person concerned about big business? Well, yes. Of course. That's your responsibility. Genesis 2:15 says this to us. So we cultivate, develop, manage. These are all the outcomes for anybody's garden. And I'm talking about the garden in your backyard to the garden of your business. It doesn't really matter. The process and the results of the work that come out of those gardens may be tainted by corruption. We're going to get to that in future episodes here. But the work is still good, Ecclesiastes tells us. So our participation in the garden, that which has been given to us to exclaim and to enjoy the spider spinning its web, much less all of the good things that we can produce from creation, that's God's intention for us. At the same time, we bear responsibility for caring for the earth. So conservation, keeping guard against abuse of creation is also necessary. And here's where I say what I just said. Cooperation between creation care and business enterprise is possible. You understand the tension. Those of you who understand business understand the tension of free market and lawful restraint. Now, let me just pause here to say that you don't have to own a business, work in a business, see somebody's business on a sign. If you are in a family, if you live in a house, you have a business. That's your business, to take care of the family. So remember a couple episodes ago we were talking about this very thing in everyday life, where the household necessities of everyday life, getting people ready for the next day, for what they are about to do, is essential. That is your business. You're about that business. So we're talking about the full scope, everything from A to Z. Everything is our responsibility in creation, including the very things in our homes. Now, I mentioned a 30,000-foot flyover a moment ago. Check this out. This is the land ordinance of 1785. Check this. Look at the picture. Do you see all those squares and some rectangles? How was that all developed? By Thomas Jefferson in 1785. He did this in something called the Public Land Survey System, where he organized everything into mile square plots, and then that would be as easy as possible to sell those plots or people to access them and actually participate in the creation that God had made. So I show this picture of this high view of creation because somebody's managing this land, and it's manageable, and that's our responsibility to do that, to actually exercise ourselves in these places. So you'll notice in Genesis 2:19 and 20, for instance, this again, prior to sin, God says that people in a place are responsible for it. Whatever your place is in this life, you bear responsibility for it. And that's a good thing. Because at some point, we're going to skip over the corruption by sin issue for just a moment because we have to elucidate this idea. This responsibility of life includes the fact that because of sin and because things have all been messed up since Genesis 3, there's going to come a day when the whole world's going to be renovated. Read 2 Peter chapter 3. The whole world's going to be renovated. Doesn't mean there's going to be a brand new earth or a brand new moon, as if we've got to take the one that is and then replace it with something else. No, it's renovation. Think HGTV at this point. We're talking about renovating that which God has already given to us. So, the idea of our place and the responsibility in it even forecasts something yet to come. But before then, and until that time, God has given us a rhythm of life. That's another one of the outlines here on your page. Notice all of the ways in which Genesis tells us about the rhythmic nature, the cadence of everyday life. In Genesis 1:11, there's sprouting vegetation. In 1:20, teeming, swarming creatures. In Genesis 1:11 and many other places, it's the emphasis of species, so something after its kind. And my favorite word in this whole grouping of words is the word separated, which literally in Hebrew means designed for a place. It has a specific purpose. So as you consider the rhythm of life, that things are doing this over and over again, consider this example, that every plant has its own DNA genetic code. And that genetic code, if you take the seed of that plant and replant that seed, will bring up the same kind of plant that you have just enjoyed eating. I think these are radish plants, for instance. So if you take the radish seeds and plant them again, guess what? You're going to get radishes, not turnips, radishes. So it's important for us to recognize that even in the seed generation of God, in the way that He's embedded His wisdom in the world, He has made His creation to literally replicate itself. These are exciting things to consider, that we have a God who has established this kind of generative process. Now, as soon as I say all these lovely things about planting, I'm going to show you a picture of a mosquito. And I have to explain something that happened this summer to part of our family, our daughter and her family. We're down in Florida on holiday. And in Florida, they have had real problems with mosquitoes. And Chelsea recounts the idea and actually showed us on these Marco Polos of kids with just huge welts of mosquito bites, because they had gone through this place that was kind of a standing fern area, real tall vegetation. And as they were going through, they were literally swarmed by mosquitoes. And Chelsea said these were not small mosquitoes. These were huge Floridians. I mean, big mosquitoes. So this whole concept of swarming and teeming is something that we now actually have a personal, practical example about. You could actually apply this to the teeming and swarming of salmon going upstream, just as much as you might about the awfulness of being chased by mosquitoes. But then there is the species, the human and the animal kingdom, and I want to make a point about this, that humans and animals are separate from each other. And the idea that somehow when an elephant gives birth, it gives birth to an elephant. When a human gives birth, it gives birth to a human. Now, that seems just so obvious and plain, but I have to say it in a culture that desperately thinks in an anti-creational point of view, whether it be about the identification of who they might be biologically, or about those people who say, well, this is just a clump of cells until that being comes out of the womb. And even then, if we listen to philosophers like Peter Singer, we need to give that 1 year after they're out of the womb to say whether or not they should continue to exist. I mean, this is anathema when it comes to an understanding of Scripture. And I tell my colleagues, and I tell people on the campus at IUPUI, I will always state vociferously, that means with great force, that I am two things. I am pro-freedom and I am pro-life, without apology, that we would kill our own offspring. This is a fascinating idea. When Ronald Reagan was president, he went to his advisors, his economic advisors, and he said, tell me about the need for, the sustaining need for Social Security into the future. And so his economists got together and they put together all their graphs and charts and numbers and quantitative analysis. And they come away and they said, well, we have to have this kind of growth rate. And Reagan said, then I am going to apply this also to the abortion issue, because if we continue to abort our children, we literally will take out the economic underpinning from our own culture and society going forward. Now, Ronald Reagan was pro-life, but he was also trying to make an approach to a culture that was a materialistic culture. To say to the materialists, look, you are so consumed by economics, You're so consumed by finances, so consumed by money. Let me tell you how you are cutting off your nose to spite your face. You are taking your legs out from under you. You are aborting the very future of your own Social Security system. Now, for those of you who know about the awful place that we are in, just generally as a culture financially, but much less the Social Security system, all of these things ring very true to us. So, Social Security and the insolvency and the killing of our children, it is absolutely true and something that is going to continue to decimate us unless there is a revival on the scale of the Assyrian revival in the book of Jonah. All right, to my favorite word in this passage, which is the word separated. It means appointed places. Notice where all of this shows up. It doesn't matter if you live on a farm, if you live in a city, if you live in a seaport, if you live in the woods. That God gave a rhythm and a cadence and an order and a harmony and a predictability to creation. And He placed people in certain spots to do certain things. So all the people along the Grecian coastline that are fishermen, we're not surprised at this because they're right on the coastline. And this is what they do. They fish. For the people that are in the interior United States, what do? They hunt wildlife. Why do they do that? Because that's where the wildlife are. So wherever it is that you are, you take care of that particular place. That place has been designed for you to care for that particular aspect of life. Now onto the rulership of life. Once again, an outline here on your handouts. Notice what God has given to us. He's given to us the responsibility of creation. He is the artist. He's made it. He regulates it. He separated it. I just mentioned that. He organized it. God called, again in the book of Genesis chapter 1. He saw, over and over and over again, God saw that it was good and appreciated. This "it was good" is an important concept here. Now let me just pause to make this point once again, going back to that Smithsonian Magazine comment a few slides back. I was listening to National Public Radio this week, or I should say I was actually reading some of their work. I don't listen to it anymore. I have to go to the dentist after I listen to NPR because I grind my teeth too much. So I'm reading this, and NPR is talking about how the government has a policy to their approach to wildfire is to let the forest burn. There are lots of thoughts going through my mind at the moment. But basically, no, that is not biblical. You have a responsibility to care for that which is, you don't just let the whole thing burn. That's not a good policy. Who in the world ever thought that was a good idea? All right, sorry. I'm kind of exercised this morning, kind of surprised at myself, but nonetheless, there it is. Now that I've said all of that, I'm going to tell you about why we should judge. There is a fallacy amongst the general populace that we don't judge. I mean, how ridiculous is that? We judge all the time. If you're a teacher, you're judging constantly. If you're a student, you're judging your teacher constantly. If you are in any kind of arrangement of any kind of relationship at all, anywhere, you are judging. Why? By the way, whether or not you actually say that to the person that you're with or not, that's a different story. But nonetheless, you're still judging. Now, we have a Truth and Two on judging, and I'll be happy to share that with you. Send me an email, and I'll send you the link to this thing. But honestly, it's just a ridiculous idea that I don't judge. Come on. Seriously? God evaluates, so do we. Let's get over that. So, let's get back to beauty and to aesthetics. So let's go to the back of the handout. And here's where you will find all kinds of stuff that I'm not going to read to you, because I won't insult your intelligence. If you would like to know my study and my research on an emphasis on beauty and how we should subscribe to it and ascribe it to our lives, then the back of the handout has everything you've ever wanted to know, where it comes from in a biblical point of view. Have at it. Read that section about the issue of everything God has made is good. It is another word in Hebrew for the concept of beauty. So let's get to the realm of life. The realm of life means that we're responsible with God in managing that which has been given to us. Now, we could go through all kinds of examples. I'm thinking about some of my friends and former students who were into horse or dog rescue. I even think about human persons who we have been hearing over the last couple of weeks, the people in Hollywood that are on strike because they only make $26,000 a year. I mean, this is pretty normal for most of the folks in Hollywood. You cannot exist in California at $26,000 a year. You can't have a house in California for that. So I'm emphasizing this, that the people who are in charge of things ought to start spreading the wealth, especially when you hear about people who are running insurance companies that make $36 million a year, like I just heard about this week. Or let me be more positive and emphasize an interior design architect. Actually, one of my former students, his name's Steve Weber. He works at FSU, Florida State University. He is on faculty there. He's just doing the second edition of his book on interior design. He attends a PCA church. He is an elder in the PCA church in his area. And Steve is at FSU teaching the next generation of interior design architecture and loves it. And this is his gift. This is the arena in which God has given him to actually exercise management along with God. Now, if you want to approach anybody about anything, any kind of concept, any issues, then just take these concepts. Again, right off the page here. But everybody's concerned about home. Everybody. It's important to all. What about this concept of reality? Let me just put to rest the old gospel ditty, this world that I'm in is passing, and I'm just passing through, and I'm looking forward to that next life. No, don't take that approach. We're not just passing through. We bear responsibility for it while we are here. And then relationship, the community necessitates a place. So if you want to talk with people, initiate conversations in your community, in your neighborhood, in your workplace, wherever. Start talking about things they all talk about, like home and family and why that's important to them. And it goes right along with Genesis. And you might be doing some pre-evangelism, who knows? Pre-evangelism means you're setting people up for the next conversation, which means maybe you get a chance to talk to them about Jesus. Because everybody's concerned about these kinds of ideas. Well, that leads us to our questions. By the way, there is a microphone up here if somebody would like to rove it, and I'll be happy to answer questions in the last few moments. But here are my questions for the day. You can take them as you will. Number one, how does where we live impact what we do? So urban, suburban, rural. I'm going this week to have a meeting with some of my IUPUI ministry partners in the city. Their position in the city is much different than mine in suburbia. But we work together well, and we have great conversations and pray for each other and care for each other. Nation, state, community. The best kind of work that we can do in creation is at the community neighborhood level. It's not good top down. It's much better bottom up. The next question, how does what we have impact what we do? Possessions, skills, and ideas. Look, if I don't utilize the gifts given to me, I'm talking about me. If I bear responsibility for teaching and for research and study and writing, then I should be about those things because those are the gifts God's given to me. And I think those are the kinds of things then that I bear responsibility for. If I don't do them, then I'm not exercising the gifts given. The same is true for all of you. You've all been given gifts, and whatever those gifts might be, whatever those skills might be, the possessions or positions that you're in. The third question, how does our view of material things influence how or why we work? Does matter, does it have us? Is that what materialism, that's what materialism is, what has us. Think about what tentacles are wrapped around daily life. Number 4, how do we depend on the rhythm of creation for our work? Every single one of us depends on rhythm, whether it be the sun rising and setting, the changing of diapers, the idea of preparing a meal, or the stop sign at a four-corner stop. Everything is about order and cadence because we're reflecting the Creator in all of those things. And how does ownership demand stewardship? How am I responsible for that which has been given to me? Well, He's given it to me to own, and you remember the famous parable of the talents and how we bear responsibility for that which has been given and to have the opportunity to help that to grow. That's our responsibility. Okay, Mike is up here if somebody wants to grab it and take on the first question. I'll be happy to address anything anybody might like to say. That, of course, necessitates that somebody, grabs the mic. Any comments or questions this morning? Yeah, so it's right up here, right in the front corner. Yeah, please. Thank you for making the long trek.
Since this is about vocation, and we were starting to talk about Genesis, and I was just starting to think of like the expanse of the universe, and you were talking about the earth and this place not disappearing, but this will be the place where God's reign continues forever. And then you were it just occurred to me, and maybe you could answer this, is vocation something, we're developing something in our lives right now, and there's an eternity coming. Does the vocation that we develop here, is it related to what comes after for eternity? Because a lot of times we think, we're just going to be living in heaven, whatever that means. But is vocation something that will continue, and what does that look like?
Yeah, that's a great question. Thank you for asking. Why don't you hang on to that, and maybe you could be my rover. Thank you so much. So is vocation something that we start here and will be placed in eternity? The short answer to that is I don't really know. I mean, the specific vocation that we're in. I can't imagine that I'm going to be doing an awful lot of teaching because the great teacher will be there, and I'm not so sure that he needs me in that sense of things. However, Scripture is pretty clear that what was begun in Genesis 1 and 2 as the intention of God will be replicated. Read Revelation 19 to 21. The replication of work actually is identified, I think it's in chapter 21, where it talks about this idea of his servants will serve him. So there is going to be work that's prospering, that was originally intended for us prior to sin, and work is a good thing. So I think that we will be working for all eternity. How that looks, what that looks like, I don't have a clue. But that's a great question because that actually gets after the very issue of, hey, do we bear responsibility and will that responsibility continue? In the sense of working, yes. Excellent question. Other questions? Do you know that in educational philosophy they tell us you have to wait 30 seconds? Do you know how long 30 seconds is? And by the way, like I tell my students, if there's a question that's going on in class, do not take this opportunity to scratch your head because I will call on you. The hand going up. Yeah. Anybody, any questions? All right. Thank you very much for being here this week. Looking forward to next and the opportunity to talk more about these things, and thank you for your question. Blessings, peace. Have a great week.